On your knees. Now. The handcuffs clicked shut. Cold metal, both wrists, behind her back. Cassidy Marlowe did not resist. She knelt on the floor of Solberg's Corner Market, a grocery store, in a small Tennessee town on a Friday evening, with a receipt still in her jacket pocket for $22.43. You think this is over? Officer Decker leaned down, close. Voice low. You show up to that hearing Monday morning. I promise you there won't be a hearing. Cassidy looked straight ahead. She said nothing, because she knew something he didn't. She knew about the camera he never found. She knew about the retired deputy sitting 20 feet away who had recognized her the moment she walked in. She knew about the 4 years of records a young officer had been quietly keeping in case this day ever came. And she knew that in 63 hours, every single person who had used a badge as a weapon in this county was going to find out what happens when you arrest the wrong woman. She just had to get there first. This is the story of what happened between that Friday evening and Monday morning. Some Fridays feel like a gift, the kind where the light comes in at just the right angle, where the air smells like cut grass and someone's dinner already cooking 2 houses down, where you walk out of class and think maybe things are going to be okay. This was one of those Fridays. Cassidy Marlowe stepped out of Hargrove Community College at 4:41 in the afternoon. She had a backpack on one shoulder, a used copy of Introduction to Psychology tucked under her arm, a coffee stain on her gray hoodie that she had been meaning to wash out since Tuesday.
She was 24 years old, freshman.
That still felt strange to say, still felt strange to think. Most of the students in her morning lecture were 18, 19. They had laptops that still smelled new. They had never had a boss, never had a lease in their name, never had to unlearn things they had spent years believing. But Cassidy had done all those things. But she was here now, and that was what mattered. She had signed the enrollment forms 6 weeks ago. She had shown her ID at the registrar's office like everyone else. She had found her classroom on the campus map, written her name on a note card for her professor, and sat in the 3rd row like any other student starting over. No one at Hargrove Community College knew what she did before this. That was exactly how she wanted it. The town of Hargrove, Tennessee, had a population of 9,200 people. It had 1 high school, 2 diners, a hardware store that had been on Main Street since 1953, and a library that closed early on Wednesdays for reasons nobody fully remembered anymore. It also had Solberg's Corner Market. If you had lived in Hargrove for more than a month, you knew Solberg's, not because it was the biggest store in town. It was not. The new grocery chain out on Route 9 had more square footage, more parking, and a self-checkout lane that the older residents deeply distrusted. But Solberg's had been on the corner of Elm and 4th since 1971. It had the same green and white awning it had always had, the same handwritten specials board in the front window, the same smell when you walked in, and coffee and cardboard and something baked earlier in the day that still lingered in the air. And it had Greta Solberg. Greta was 76 years old. She had white hair cut short and practical. She wore the same navy blue apron she had worn for as long as anyone in Hargrove could remember. She moved behind the counter with the unhurried confidence of someone who had stood in that exact spot for decades and intended to stand there for decades more. She knew most of her customers by name. She knew what they bought before they asked for it. She knew who was having a hard week and who had good news they were trying not to brag about. She had watched babies become teenagers and teenagers become parents and parents become grandparents. This was her store. This was her community. This was her life's work. And on this particular Friday at 5:05 in the afternoon, Cassidy Marlowe pushed open the front door and stepped inside. Cassidy grabbed a small basket from the stack by the entrance. She had a list in her head, not written down, just the usual. Something for dinner, something for lunch tomorrow, maybe a piece of fruit if anything looked good. She had learned how to shop for one person years ago. Small amounts, nothing that would go bad before she got to it. She moved through the store without hurrying, past the bread, past the canned goods, into the produce section where an older gentleman was carefully choosing between 2 heads of lettuce with the kind of focus most people reserved for important decisions. Cassidy reached past him to grab a bag of apples. "Sorry," she said. He glanced up. "Don't be sorry, sweetheart. Take your time." She smiled and moved on. She added pasta to her basket, then a jar of marinara. Then she stopped at the cheese section and stood there longer than she meant to, reading labels out of habit. There was a kind of peace in standing in a grocery store at 5 o'clock on a Friday. a kind of ordinariness that she had not fully appreciated before. She was thinking about that when she heard the bell above the front door. She did not look up right away. She was still reading the label on a block of sharp cheddar. But something in the back of her mind registered the sound of heavy boots on hardwood, a particular kind of stride, the kind that was slow on purpose. She did not turn around. She put the cheese in her basket and moved toward the back of the store. Officer Troy Decker had been with the Hargrove Sheriff's Department for 16 years. He was 43 years old. Broad shoulders, dark hair going gray at the temples, a face that had probably been handsome once, and now just looked tired in a way that had curdled into something harder. He walked into Solberg's Corner Market at 5:07 p.m. and did not look at the shelves. He looked at people. That was a thing you learned in 60 years, Jean, how to walk into a room and to do a sweep and take stock of who was there, where they were standing, whether anyone was paying attention to you. He scanned the store in about 4 seconds. The older man with the lettuce, a woman in her 50s at the far end of the store, 2 men near the coffee station who had been talking for what looked like a while, Greta Solberg behind the counter, not looking up from whatever she was straightening, and at the back of the store, near the dairy section, a young woman, gray hoodie, dark hair, backpack, shopping basket. He had seen the photo 40 minutes ago. He stood at the front of the store for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number and kept his voice low. "She's in there," he said. "Dairy section, yeah, give me 5 minutes." He ended the call and walked toward the coffee station. He poured himself a cup he did not want. He watched the young woman move through the store, unhurried, quiet, picking things up, reading labels, placing things in her basket with care. Watched her walk to a checkout counter and set her basket down. Then he made another call, this one to the back office. Greta Solberg had a talent for reading situations. You developed that talent when you ran a business for 50 years in a small town. You learned the difference between a customer who was confused and a customer who was planning something. You learned the difference between someone having a bad day and someone who was dangerous. And you learned to recognize when something was happening in your store that should not be happening. She had seen Decker come in. She had seen him pour that coffee and not drink it. She had seen him looking at the young woman by the dairy case with a particular kind of attention. Not the tension of some wild brown. Something more deliberate than that. She knew Troy Decker. She had known him since he was a deputy in his late 20s, back when he was still trying to impress people. She had watched him get comfortable over the years. Comfortable with the uniform. Comfortable with the way people stepped back when he walked through a door. She had watched him stop trying to impress anyone. The phone in the back office rang. She heard young Marcus, the assistant manager, pick it up. She could not hear the words, but she could see his face from across the store when he hung up. The way he stood up straighter, the way he looked toward the checkout counter and then toward the back. She felt something settle into her stomach, not quite dread, more like recognition. She had seen this before. Cassidy put her basket on the belt at register 1. Apples, pasta, marinara, sharp cheddar, a box of crackers she had added at the last minute, and a small bunch of yellow tulips from the bucket near the register that she almost talked herself out of, and then decided not to. She believed in yellow tulips on a Friday. The young woman at the register started scanning. She was maybe 21. "Name tag," said Brianna. She was fast and professional and complimented Cassidy on the tulips. "They're the last bunch," Brianna said. "People love the yellow ones." "I can see why," Cassidy said. Her total came to $22.43. She paid with her debit card. She put her receipt in her jacket pocket. She was waiting for her bags when she heard footsteps behind her. She did not turn around right away. "Excuse me." It was a male voice, practiced authority in it. The kind of voice that expected people to turn around immediately. Cassidy finished putting the tulips gently on top of her bag, then she turned. A man in a Hargrove County Sheriff's Department uniform stood 2 feet away, broad, badge catching the fluorescent light, arms loose at his sides in a way that was supposed to look relaxed and did not quite succeed. "Yes?" Cassidy said. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step to the back with me." She looked at him steadily. "Why?" "We've had a report of a customer taking merchandise without paying. I need to verify your items." Cassidy reached into her jacket pocket and held up her receipt. "I just paid. Brianna at register 1 can confirm." Decker did not look at the receipt. He did not look at Brianna. "I'm going to need you to come with me to the back," he said again. Same tone, like he had not heard her. Cassidy felt something very clear and very calm settle over her. She recognized this feeling. She had felt it before, in rooms that were a lot more serious than a grocery store. It was not quite anger. It was more like a door closing quietly inside her, a shift from one mode to another. She looked at him. She took in the badge number, the name on the tag, the way he was standing, the way his right hand had drifted slightly toward his belt even though there was no reason for it to be there. She looked at the back office where a young man in a manager's vest was watching from the doorway. She looked at Greta Solberg, who had stopped what she was doing and was watching from behind the counter. Then she looked back at Decker. "I will come with you," she said, "but I want you to know that I'm aware of my rights. I have my receipt. I have paid for everything in these bags, and I am going to remember every detail of this investigation."
She picked up her grocery bags. Decker stepped aside and gestured toward the back.
Cassidy walked. The back room at Solberg's Corner Market was not intimidating by design. It was just a stockroom. Metal shelving units along the walls. Boxes of canned goods stacked in rows. A folding table in the center with a couple of plastic chairs. A single light overhead that hummed faintly. There was a security camera mounted in the upper left corner. The wire that ran from it to the wall had been disconnected. Cassidy noticed this within 3 seconds of walking through the door. She did not say anything about it. She sat down in one of the plastic chairs, set her grocery bags on the floor, and folded her hands on the table. Decker sat down from her. He put a small notepad on the table. He clicked his pen. He looked at her the way people looked at things they had already decided what to think about. "Name," he said. "Cassidy Marlowe. Address, 214 Birchwood Lane, Hargrove. How long have you lived there?" 7 weeks. "Where did you live before that?" "Clarksville." He wrote that down slowly. Like the writing itself was a kind of pressure. "What brought you to Hargrove?" "School. I'm enrolled at Hargrove Community College." "Doing what?" "General Studies. First year." He looked up. "You seem a little old for a freshman." Cassidy met his eyes. People start things at different times. He held her gaze for a beat, then he moved behind his expression, not curiosity, more like confirmation, like a box being checked. "What did you do in Clarksville?" he said. "I worked." "Doing what?" "Public service." He stopped writing. He put the pen down. He leaned back in his chair and looked at her in a way that was supposed to feel like a reveal. "Public service," he said. "That's interesting." "What kind?" Cassidy looked at him. She looked at the notepad. She looked at the disconnected camera wire. She looked at the way he had phrased that last question. Not suspicious, knowing. And in that moment she understood exactly what was happening. He already knew where she had worked. He already knew who she was. He had known before she walked through the front door of this store. The questions he was asking were not investigative questions. They were positioning questions. He was creating a record, a narrative, something that would look on paper like a legitimate stop that escalated. This had nothing to do with shoplifting. This had everything to do with Monday morning. She's nothing for 5 full seconds. Then she said very quietly, "You already know the answers to these questions." Decker did not blink. "Excuse me. The questions you're asking me," she said. "You already know the answers, which means this conversation is not about what happened, Register 1. It's about something else." He picked up his pen again. "I'm conducting a routine investigation of a shoplifting report." "From who?" "That's confidential." "The report came from someone inside this store," she said. "Someone who was told to make it. Within the last 15 minutes. Because you made a phone call when you came in." The pen stopped moving. Cassidy watched his face. She was not angry. She was observing, the way she had been trained to observe. The way 4 years of professional work had taught her to read a room, read a person, read the space between what someone was saying and what they actually meant. "You're going to want to be very careful about what happens next," she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. Not as a threat. "I want to be clear about that. I'm saying it because I think you may not fully understand the position you're putting yourself in." Decker set the pen down. He leaned forward, and for the first time since she had walked into this room, he dropped the procedural performance. "You filed a complaint," he said. His voice was quieter now too. "Against people I know, people who have been doing this job a long time, and you think you're going to walk into a Monday morning hearing and blow up careers that have been built over decades." Cassidy said nothing. "I'm doing you a courtesy," he said. "I'm giving you a chance to think about what you're doing. To think about whether this is really how you want to spend the next chapter of your life." She looked at him for a long moment. "I want to ask you something," she said. He waited.
"How many times have you done this before?"
The question landed in the room and stayed there. His jaw tightened. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. I think you do, she said, and I think part of you knows that this time is different. In the store, Greta Solberg had stopped pretending to stock shelves. She stood behind the counter with her hands flat on the surface and watched the door to the back room. Marcus was at his desk again. The two men at the coffee station had noticed something was off and were talking in lower voices now. Clifford Oakes was still in his chair in the corner. Clifford was 73 years old. He was a big man, though the years had softened the edges of it. He had a gray mustache and a pair of reading glasses pushed up on his forehead that he sometimes forgot were there. He came to Solberg's every Friday at about 4:30 for a cup of coffee and sometimes a slice of whatever Greta had baked that morning. He had been a deputy in Hargrove County for 26 years. He had retired 9 years ago and had not missed the job for a single day. But some things you did not unlearn. He had watched Decker walk in, had watched him pour that coffee and not drink it, had watched him make those phone calls with his back half turned to the room, had watched him approach the young woman at the checkout counter with that particular posture, that deliberate, practiced posture. Clifford had used that posture himself. He knew what it meant. He set his hot coffee cup down. He looked at the back room door. Then he looked at Greta. She caught his eye. Her expression did not change, but she gave one small, slow nod. Clifford stayed where he was, but he did not leave. The front door opened. Renata Voss stepped in from the sidewalk. She was 58 years old, with short brown hair and the particular alert expression of someone who had spent 30 years paying attention to things other people missed. She worked for the Hargrove Courier. She had been covering local news in this town for longer than some of its residents had been alive. She had come in for coffee and a box of crackers. She saw Clifford sitting rigid in his corner chair. She saw Greta's hands flat on the counter. She saw the closed door to the back room and the way no one in the store seemed to be moving quite naturally. She set her bag down at the coffee station. She did not take out her phone yet, but she took out her notebook. In the back room, Decker had made a decision. He stood up. He walked to the door and opened it. He spoke briefly with Marcus in the hallway. Then he came back in and sat down again. "I've called Sheriff Langton," he said. "He's on his way." Cassidy nodded slowly. "Okay. This gives you time to think about your situation." "I've been thinking about my situation since I walked in here," she said. She looked at her grocery bags on the floor. The yellow tulips were just visible at the top of one of them. She had been looking forward to putting them in a glass on her kitchen windowsill. A small thing, but she had been looking forward to it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Decker looked at her. "What do you tell yourself?" she said. "When you do something like this, what is the story you tell yourself about why it's okay?" He stared at her. "Because I'm not asking to be difficult," she said. "I'm asking because I think it matters. I think the story we tell ourselves about the things we do is one of the most important things about a person. And I think sometimes, when we've been telling ourselves this story for long enough, we stop being able to hear how it sounds to someone else." Decker said nothing. "You've probably told yourself that the people I reported deserved protecting, that they've done good work and I don't understand the full picture, that someone like me, coming in from outside, doesn't have the right to disrupt something that's been working." She paused. "And maybe some of that is even true," she said. "People are complicated. I know that. But there are things that are not complicated. There are lines that are not gray. And what you are doing in this room right now today is on the wrong side of one of those lines. And I think some part of you already knows that." The room was very quiet. The light overhead hummed. Decker looked at the table. Not at her. That told her something. Greta Solberg made a phone call. She stepped into the small office adjacent to the stockroom, not the back room where Cassidy was, but the front office with the old wooden desk and the framed photo of the store from 1971 on opening day. Her husband Lars was in that photo, 29 years old, grinning, holding the door open like he was welcoming the whole world. She looked at that photo for a moment. Then she dialed her son Warren. Warren Solberg was 49 years old. He lived 20 minutes from Hargrove. He had grown up stocking these shelves and had gone on to become an electrical engineer and had moved back after his father passed because he wanted to be closer to his mother. 3 years ago, after a break-in that rattled Greta more than she let on, Warren had spent a weekend installing a camera system in the store. Not the basic system, a real one, IPIME cameras, cloud backup, motion-activated recording, and a secondary system, hidden cameras, 3 of them, separate network, separate cloud account, not connected to anything in the store's main infrastructure. invisible to anyone who did not know they were there. He had put one in the back room because Greta had asked him to. "I've been doing this 50 years, she had told him, "and sometimes things happen in that back room that I need a record of." Warren had not asked questions. He had just installed it. The camera in the back room had been recording since 5:09 p.m. Everything was going to a secure server. When Greta reached Warren on the phone, she said only this: "There's a situation at the store. I need you to check the feed from camera 3 and save everything from the last 30 minutes. There was a brief pause. "Already watching," Warren said. "I'm on my way." Outside Solberg's corner market, a strange thing was beginning to happen. It started with the two men who had been at the coffee station. They had come outside because they wanted to talk without being overheard. They were standing on the sidewalk when one of them, a retired schoolteacher named Gordon Fitch, mentioned what he had seen to a woman who was walking past with her dog. The woman knew someone who had seen Decker walk in with that look he had. That person told someone else. This was how news traveled in Hargrove, Tennessee. Not through screens, not through notifications. Through the old reliable network of people who knew each other and watched out for each other and had learned over a lifetime to pay attention when something felt wrong. By 5:35 p.m., there were 7 people standing on the sidewalk outside Solberg's. By 5:50 p.m., there were 12. None of them had organized this. None of them had called each other to come. They had simply arrived and found others already there and had stayed because leaving felt like the wrong thing to do. Clifford Oakes came out and stood on the front step. He did not say anything. He just stood there in the early evening light, with his hands in the pockets of his jacket and his reading glasses still pushed up on his forehead. Renata Voss stood near the door with her notebook open. She had been in this town a long time. She had covered zoning disputes and school board elections and the occasional tragedy that a small town could not entirely escape. She had never seen people collect like this without being asked. She wrote that down. Sheriff Boyd Langton pulled up at 5:48 p.m. He was 61 years old, a solid, serious-looking man with close-cropped silver hair and face that had spent a lot of years learning not to show too much. He had been sheriff of Hargrove County for 22 years. He was 8 months from retirement. He had been looking forward to those 8 months more than he had looked forward to almost anything. He got out of his vehicle and looked at the people on the sidewalk. He recognized most of them. That was the thing about being sheriff for 20 out of 9,000. You recognized almost everyone. He recognized Clifford Oakes. Clifford had been one of the best deputies he had ever worked with, had retired clean, had never caused any trouble, had just gotten quieter with age, the way some men did. Clifford was looking at him with an expression Langton could not quite read. Langton walked into the store. Greta Solberg looked up from behind the counter. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the back room door. He went that way. Decker met him in the hallway before he got to the door. The conversation was brief. Langton kept his expression neutral. He was good at neutral. He had spent 22 years getting good at it. He looked through the small window in the back room door. The young woman was sitting at the folding table, both hands on the table, posture straight, not slouching, not fidgeting, not looking at her phone, because her phone was in her jacket pocket, where she had put it when she sat down. She was just waiting. There was a quality to the way she was waiting that Langton had seen before and not often. It was the quality of someone who was not afraid of this room. He looked at Decker. Decker gave him the summary. Report of a customer taking merchandise. Routine stop. She had become argumentative, was being uncooperative. Langton looked back through the window. She did not look argumentative. She looked like a person sitting in a chair waiting for whatever came next, with a particular stillness of someone who had a very clear sense of who they were. Something moved in Langton's chest that he did not quite acknowledge. He pushed the door open and walked in. Cassidy looked up when the door opened. She saw the second uniform, older, more authority in the posture. The name tag said Langton, and below that, Sheriff. She waited. Langton pulled out the other plastic chair and sat down. He did not perform the way Decker had. He did not click a pen or open a notebook. He just sat down and looked at her. "Ms. Marlowe," he said. "Sheriff, I understand there's been some confusion this afternoon. There's been a stop without legal basis," she said. "I have my receipt. I paid for everything in my bags." The report that initiated this stop was made to a store employee by Officer Decker within minutes of him entering the store. Langton's expression did not change. "I understand you have some concerns," he said. "I have more than concerns," she said. But I'm not interested in making this harder than it needs to be. I'm interested in leaving this store with my groceries and being home before dark. Langton looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Decker, who was standing near the door. And for just 1 second, something crossed Langton's face. Not doubt. It was older and heavier than doubt. It was the look of a man who had made the same quiet compromise so many times that he had stopped counting them, and was now in this particular room on this particular Friday, beginning to wonder what all of those compromises had added up to. It lasted about 2 seconds. Then he looked back at Cassidy. "I'm going to need you to remain here while we verify the report," he said. Cassidy looked at him steadily. She thought about the hearing on Monday morning. She thought about 14 months of documentation, of careful, quiet, painstaking work done the right way, through the right channels, at significant personal cost. She thought about what this room was designed to make her feel and the fact that it was not working. "Sheriff Langton," she said. Her voice was even and clear. "You can verify the transaction at Register 1 in about 45 seconds. My receipt is in my jacket pocket. Brianna at Register 11 can confirm every item. This does not require me to stay in this room." She paused. "But if you are telling me that I am being detained, I need you to state that clearly. Because if I am being detained, I have rights that attach to that detention, and I would like to exercise them." The room was quiet. Outside, through the walls, she could faintly hear the sound of people on the sidewalk. More voices than had been there when she walked in. Langton looked at his hands. Then he looked up. "You're not being detained," he said. Decker made a sound that was almost a word. Langton looked at him. Just looked at him. Decker went quiet. Cassidy stood up. She picked up her grocery bags. She straightened the strap of her backpack. She looked at Langton one more time. "I'd like to say one thing before I go," she said. He waited. "Whatever brought me into this room today," she said, "it isn't going to work. Not because I'm angry about it. I'm not. But because the thing you're trying to stop is already in motion. And stopping me from walking through a door on Monday morning doesn't change what's in the file." She looked at him with something that was not quite pity and not quite compassion, but lived somewhere between the two. "You seem like a man who knows the difference between right and wrong," she said. "I hope you'll think about which side of this you want to be on. There's still time to choose." She walked to the door and opened it herself. She stepped back out into the store. The light was different. The afternoon had shifted toward evening while she was in that room. The overhead lights in the store felt warmer somehow. Greta Solberg was standing behind her counter. She was not pretending to do anything. She was just standing there, watching, hands flat on the surface. Cassidy walked toward the front of the store. She passed Clifford Oakes, who was back in his corner chair. He looked at her over his coffee cup. His eyes were steady and careful and had the quality of someone who had seen enough of the world to recognize what they were looking at. He nodded once. She nodded back. She pushed open the front door. The evening air hit her, cooler than it had been when she walked in. The sidewalk in front of Solberg's Corner Market had more people on it than she expected. 15, maybe more. Standing in small groups, some talking quietly, some just standing. They looked at her when she came out. She looked back at them. She did not know most of these faces. She had been in this town for 7 weeks. She had not had time to know people yet. But she felt something in that moment that she had not expected to feel. She felt the weight of the community around her, not pressing down, holding up. The quiet, sturdy presence of people who had shown up, not because anyone told them to, but because something in them recognized that something important was happening and they wanted to be near it. She stood on the front step for a moment. She looked down at her grocery bags. The yellow tulips were still there at the top, slightly bent from the bag but still bright, still yellow. She thought about what was ahead of her. 63 hours until Monday morning. 63 hours until a room where the truth she had spent 14 months building would finally have a place to land. She had known coming to Hargrove involved risk. She had not known the risk would look like this. A Friday afternoon in a grocery store, an officer with an agenda, a back room with a disconnected camera wire. But here she was, and she was still standing, and the tulips were still yellow. She stepped off the front step onto the sidewalk. She walked to her car. She put her bags in the back seat carefully, the tulips on top, where they would not get crushed. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment. She looked at Solberg's Corner Market through the windshield. Through the front window, she could see Greta Solberg moving behind the counter, moving with that unhurried, certain confidence. The confidence of someone who had built something that mattered and knew it. Cassidy thought about that. She thought about what it meant to build something, to show up in the same place day after day, year after year, and to keep showing up because you believed in what you were doing and you believed in the people around you and you did not let the difficult Fridays change that. That was a kind of courage too. Not the kind that got written about, not the kind with a badge on it, but real and necessary and worth protecting. She started the car. She pulled out of the parking spot, and at the corner of Elm on 4th, she stopped at the light and looked in her rearview mirror. The people on the sidewalk were still there, still standing. She watched them for the 3 seconds the light took to change. Then she drove. Inside the store, Warren Solberg had arrived. He sat in the small front office with his laptop open. On the screen, 4 camera feeds, 3 visible, one that no one except him and his mother knew existed. He had saved everything from the past 51 minutes to 3 separate locations. He put on his glasses and began to watch from the beginning. In the back room, Sheriff Langton was still sitting at the folding table. Decker had gone. Langton had told him to go. Langton sat alone in the room with the disconnected camera wire and the 2 plastic chairs and the single humming light. He sat there for a long time, and for the first time in a long time, he let himself think about what he had become. The evening settled over Hargrove the way it always did in October. Slowly, quietly, the light going amber first, then copper, then finally giving up and letting the dark come in from the edges of things. By 6 o'clock, the street lamps on Elm and 4th had clicked on. The people who had been standing on the sidewalk outside Solberg's corner market had not all gone home. Most of them had. The ones with dinners to make and grandchildren to call and television programs that started at 6. They had drifted off in 1s and 2s, speaking quietly to each other as they went. But some had stayed. Clifford Oakes was still there. He had moved from his corner chair inside to the bench on the sidewalk, just to the left of the front door. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his coffee cup empty in his hands, and he watched the parking lot. Gordon Fitch, the retired schoolteacher, had come back after walking his neighbor's dog home. He stood near the lamppost with his hands in his jacket pockets. A woman named Bet Halloran, 69 years old, who had been buying groceries at Solberg since before Greta's husband Lars passed, was sitting on a folding chair that someone had brought out from inside. She had her coat on and she was not going anywhere. Renata Voss was still there. Her notebook had 7 pages of notes in it now. She had not called anyone yet. She was still watching, still listening, still waiting to understand the full shape of what she was looking at before she put her name on anything. That was how she had always worked. 30 years of it. Inside the store, Greta was closing up. She did this the same way she had done it for 50 years. Turned the sign on the front door, counted the register, wiped down the counter, checked the coolers. Turned off the lights in the back section first, then the middle, leaving only the front lights on while she finished. Marcus had gone home. Brianna had gone home. It was just Greta and Warren now. Warren sat at the desk in the front office with his laptop. He had his reading glasses on. He had watched the footage 3 times already from the beginning. He had made notes. He had saved everything to 3 separate places. He was calm in the way of someone who knew exactly what they were looking at and exactly what to do with it. He was his mother's son. Greta came to the office doorway and leaned against the frame. "How much did it get?" she said. "Everything from 5:09 until she walked out." Warren looked up. "Audio is clear. You can hear every word." Greta nodded slowly. "All of it," Warren said, including the part where he told her why she was really in there. Greta was quiet for a moment. "She knew," Greta said. "She knew the whole time." "Yeah," Warren said, "she did." Greta looked at the front window. She could see Clifford Oakes sitting on the bench outside, just visible in the lamplight. "What do we do with it?" she said. Warren looked at her. "That depends on her. It's her footage as much as ours, maybe more." Greta untied her navy apron. She folded it the way she always folded it at the end of the night, careful, deliberate, pressing the creases flat with the palm of her hand. She looked at the apron for a moment. "Then we find her," she said. Cassidy had been home for 40 minutes. She had put the tulips in a glass of water on the windowsill. She had made pasta. She had eaten standing at the kitchen counter because she was not hungry to sit down, but knew she needed to eat. She was thinking. She was thinking about Decker's face when she said, "You already know the answers to these questions." She was thinking about Langton, about the 2 seconds when something had moved across his face, about what that something was. She was thinking about Monday, 62 hours and change. She had the documentation. She had the timeline. She had her notes from 14 months of careful, quiet work. She had copies of everything in 3 different places, because she had been in this business long enough to know that things disappeared when they were inconvenient. What she did not have was a witness to what had happened this afternoon. She had her receipt. She had her word. Decker had 16 years in the department and a phone call he had made before anyone was looking. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the tulips, yellow in the lamplight from outside. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. She almost let it go. Then she picked it up. "Cassidy Marlowe," she said. "Mrs. Marlowe." The voice was a woman's, older with a deliberate, unhurried quality to it. "My name is Greta Solberg. I own the store you were in this afternoon." Cassidy was very still. "I know who you are," the voice continued, "and I think there's something you need to see." She was back at Solberg's at 7:15 p.m. The store was dark from the outside. The sign said "Closode." But there was light coming from the front office window, and when she knocked, Warren Solberg opened the door. He shook her hand. He did not say much. He had the practical, economy of words manner of someone who communicated better through what he built than what he said. He led her to the front office and sat her down in front of the laptop. "There are cameras you didn't know about," he said. "Camera 3 is in the back room. It's been there for 3 years. SEP network. No connection to the main system." Cassidy looked at the screen. "It recorded everything," Warren said. "From when you walked in until when you walked out." She watched it. All of it. She watched herself sit down at the folding table and put her hands flat on the surface. She watched Decker come in and perform his procedure. She watched herself hold up the receipt. She watched the conversation she had already lived through, from the outside now, and it looked exactly the way it had felt. She watched the moment when Decker said, "You filed a complaint against people I know." She watched her own face when he said it. Calm still. Taking it in, she watched Langton come in. She watched his expression when he looked at her. She watched the 2 seconds she had noticed in the room. On camera, those 2 seconds looked longer, more significant. She watched herself stand up and walk out. The footage ended. The room was quiet. Greta Solberg was standing in the doorway behind her. Cassidy turned around. "Why?" Cassidy said. Greta tilted her head slightly. "Why are you giving this to me?" Greta looked at her for a moment. "Because what happened in my store today was wrong. And I've been running this place since 1971. I know the difference between wrong and complicated. That was not complicated." Cassidy looked at the woman, the white hair, the steady eyes, the way she stood in the doorway of her own store with the ease of someone who belonged there completely. "This could create problems for you," Cassidy said. "With the department, with the county." "I've had problems before," Greta said. "I'm still here. A beat. There's something else," Warren said. He clicked to a different section of footage. The timestamp showed 5:03 p.m., before Cassidy had even entered the store. It was footage from camera 1 near the front entrance. It showed Decker walking in, walking to the coffee station, picking up his phone, making a call with his back half turned to the room, and then, 2 minutes later, making a second call. The second call was to the back office. You could tell because 30 seconds after he hung up, Marcus appeared at the office doorway and looked toward the checkout counter. "He made the call before you got to the register," Warren said. "Before you were done shopping." Cassidy looked at the timestamp. 5:03 p.m. She had reached the register at 5:08 p.m. The report was made before she had even finished her transaction. She leaned back in her chair. She was quiet for a long moment. "I need to make a call," she said. The person she called was not a lawyer. He was not in law enforcement. His name was Clifford Oakes. She had his number because Warren had given it to her before she left the store, saying simply, "Sam, there's a man outside who's been waiting all evening, and I think you should talk to him." She had walked out the back of Solberg's to avoid the remaining people at the front. She had found the bench around the corner, and she had found Clifford sitting on it. He had looked at her with those steady, experienced eyes. She had looked at him. "You were a deputy," she said. It was not a guess. 26 years, he said. "Retired 9 years ago." She sat down on the bench beside him. "You were watching when he walked in," she said. "I was watching before that," Clifford said. "I recognized what he was doing, the way he came in, the body language, the phone calls." He paused. "I've seen it done before. Not often, but I've seen it. Done by who?" He looked at her steadily. "By people who thought they had something to protect." She nodded slowly. "What are you going to do?" he said. "Monday morning, there's a hearing at Clarksville," she said. "Internal affairs. I filed a complaint 14 months ago against officers who were doing things that shouldn't be done. The hearing is the result of that. And today was an attempt to keep you away from it. Yes. Clifford was quiet for a moment. He looked at the street lamp across the way. Something moved in his face, the look of a man doing arithmetic, adding things up. I can make a statement, he said, about what I observed inside the store. Before she went to the back, Cassidy looked at him. I'm a credible witness, he said, not boasting, just factual. 26 years in the department. Clean record, no reason to lie. He paused. And I know Boyd Langton. I've known him since he was a deputy himself. He's not a bad man, I know, Cassidy said. But he's been making bad choices, Clifford said, for long enough that he's stopped seeing them as choices. The night air was cool. A car passed on Elm Street. Somewhere down the block, someone's porch light came on. That's not an excuse, Clifford said. I want to be clear about that. It's not an excuse. But I think it matters for how you deal with him. Cassidy looked at her hands. There's a version of a person, Clifford said slowly, who knows better but does the easier thing anyway. And after a while, the easier thing becomes the only thing they know how to do. And they look up one day and realize they don't recognize themselves anymore. He paused. I've been that person, he said. Once, a long time ago, and I had someone sit me down and say something honest to me and changed the direction of my life. Cassidy was quiet. I'm not saying Boyd is reachable, Clifford said. I'm saying it's worth finding out before this goes further. She thought about Langton's face in the back room. The 2 seconds, I said something to him, she said. Before I left, I told him there was still time to choose. Clifford nodded slowly. What did he do? Nothing, she said. But he heard it. Then maybe we'll see, Clifford said. Sometimes hearing it is enough, sometimes it isn't. But you have to give a man the chance to surprise you. She looked at him for a long moment. Why does this matter to you, she said. You don't know me. Clifford looked back at her. Because I know what it costs, he said. To do what you did. To file that complaint. To walk into a system you're part of and say, this is wrong, and I'm going to say so. I know what that takes, and I know what happens to people who do it when nobody stands behind them. He looked at the store. And because Greta's been running that store for 50 years, he said. And what happened in there today will disrespectful to her and to this community and to about 14 other things I believe in. He picked up his empty coffee cup. Mostly, he said, because it was wrong. And I'm too old to watch something wrong happen and pretend I didn't see it. The next morning was Saturday. Cassidy woke at 6 without an alarm. Old habit. She made coffee and sat at her kitchen table with her notes spread out in front of her. 50 hours until Monday morning. She had the footage. Warren had sent her a copy on an encrypted drive the previous night. She had the time-stamped recording of Decker's calls. She had the footage of the back room. She had her receipt. And she had Clifford Oakes. She was building something. She could feel the shape of it. The way you feel the shape of an argument when all the pieces are in front of you and you can see how they connect. She had done this before, but this time it was different because it was hers. She thought about that. She thought about what Clifford had said about the cost of filing a complaint. He was right that it had cost her. It had cost her sleep and relationships and the simple comfort of walking into a building where she worked and feeling safe there. It had cost her the version of her life where she did not know what she knew. You could not unknow things. That was something nobody told you when you were starting out. That the moment you saw something clearly, really clearly, you were responsible for it. You could look away. People looked away all the time. But once you had really seen, looking away was a choice. And choices had weight. She had made her choice 14 months ago. She was still making it. She refilled her coffee and went back to her notes. At 9:30 Saturday morning, there was a knock on her door. She was not expecting anyone. She looked through the pool, a woman she did not recognize. Brown hair, a notebook tucked under one arm. Cassidy opened the door. Miss Marlowe, the woman said. My name is Renata Voss. I'm a reporter with the Hargrove Courier. I was in Solberg's Corner Market yesterday evening. A pause. I saw what happened. Cassidy looked at her. I'm not here to pressure you, Renata said. I just want to talk. You can say no. You can close the door. But I think you should know that what happened yesterday has people in this town paying attention. And I think you deserve to know that before Monday. Cassidy held the door open wider. Come in, she said. They sat at the kitchen table. Renata did not open her notebook right away. She just sat with her hands around a mug of coffee and talked. She had been in Hargrove for 30 years. She had covered the county. She had watched the department. She knew Langton. She knew his history. She knew the way certain cases had been handled in ways that never quite made sense. There have been whispers, Renata said, over the years. Cases closed without good reason. people who came from outside the county having a harder time than they should have. Nothing I could ever pin down into a story. Nothing concrete enough. She looked at Cassidy. Until yesterday, she said. Cassidy turned her coffee mug in her hands. What are you asking for, she said. I'm not asking for anything, Renata said. I'm telling you what I saw. And I'm telling you that if there is a story here that serves the public interest, I will cover it accurately and fairly. That's all. Cassidy was quiet for a moment. There's a hearing on Monday, she said, at Clarksville PD. Renata nodded. Whatever happens in that hearing is the story, Cassidy said. Not me, not yesterday. The pattern, the people who were protected, the people who weren't. Renata looked at her steadily. I understand. If I talk to you on the record, Cassidy said, it's after Monday, after the hearing, whatever happens. That's fair, Renata said. She started to close her notebook, then she paused. Can I ask you something off the record? She said. Cassidy looked at her. How are you? Renata said. Not the case. Not Monday, just, how are you? It was such a simple question, such a human question. Cassidy blinked, and for just a second something moved across her face that she did not usually let show. I'm tired, she said. It's been a long 14 months, Renata nodded. I know that kind of tired, she said. The kind that isn't about sleep. Yeah, Cassidy said. That kind. They sat with that for a moment. For what it's worth, Renata said. What you're doing takes something. Real something. Not everyone has it. Cassidy looked out the window at the tulips on the windowsill, yellow in the morning light now. They had opened up overnight, fuller than they had been when she put them in the glass. I just keep showing up, she said. That's all. I just keep showing up. Saturday afternoon brought something unexpected. Clifford Oakes called her at 2 o'clock. Langton wants to meet, he said. Just the two of them. Not official. He knows a diner on Route 9 that's quiet on Saturday afternoons. Cassidy was quiet for a moment. You trust him? She said. I trust that he's scared, Clifford said. And I trust that somewhere under the scared there's still the man I used to know. Whether that man shows up this afternoon, I can't guarantee. She thought about it. All right, she said. The diner was called Patton's. It had been on Route 9 for 40 years. Vinyl booths, coffee in thick ceramic mugs, a pie case near the register with 3 kinds of pie under glass. Langton was already there when she walked in. He was in a booth at the back, out of uniform, jeans and a jacket. He looked smaller without the uniform, more like a man and less like an institution. He stood slightly when she came in. A reflex, old-fashioned manners. She slid into the booth across from him. The waitress came. They both ordered coffee. They did not look at the menus. Langton wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at the table for a moment before he looked at her. I'm going to say something, and I want you to let me get through it, he said. All right, she said. I made the wrong call yesterday, he said. I came into that store knowing what Troy was doing, and I let it happen. I didn't stop it when I should have stopped it. I told myself I was managing the situation, but I was managing it for the wrong reasons. He paused. I've been doing that for a while, making calls for the wrong reasons and telling myself it was judgment. Cassidy said nothing. I'm not asking you to do anything with that, he said. I'm not asking you to go easy on me or to factor it into whatever happens Monday. I'm just saying it out loud because I think somebody needs to hear me say it. He looked up at her. You said there was still time to choose, he said. In the back room, you said that. I remember, she said. I've been thinking about it since, he said, since you walked out of that room. I sat in there for about 20 minutes after you left, just sitting. He paused. I've been doing this job for 22 years. And I sat in that room and I tried to remember the last time I made a decision I was genuinely proud of. Cassidy looked at him. There was something important happening in this booth. Not a negotiation, not a strategy. Just a man in his 60s, 8 months from the end of a long career, sitting in a vinyl booth and trying to find his way back to something he had lost. She recognized what that cost him. She knew what it cost to say, out loud, I was wrong. She knew it from the inside. What are you going to do? She said. He looked at his coffee. I'm going to make a statement, he said, to internal affairs about what I observed yesterday, about what I've observed over the past several years, about cases that were closed in ways I knew were not right. He paused. And about my own part in that. Cassidy was still. That's going to end your career, she said. My career was going to end in 8 months anyway, he said. The question is what the last 8 months look like. What the last 8 months mean. He looked at her. I'd rather they mean something. She looked at this man across the table from her. She thought about what Clifford had said. Sometimes hearing it is enough. She thought about the 14 months of work, the careful documentation, the cost of it, The weight of doing the right thing in the dark, when nobody was watching, when there was no guarantee it would ever matter. She thought about the people before her who had been through rooms like that back room at Solberg's and had not had a receipt in their pocket, had not had Warren's hidden camera, had not had a community standing outside. There are other people, she said quietly, people who were stopped the same way, who didn't have what I have. I know, Langton said. Their cases will need to be reopened. I know, he said again. That's part of any statement you make. That has to be in there. He nodded. He looked like a man who had made a decision and was now sitting with the full weight of it. Okay, he said. They were quiet for a moment. The diner hummed around them. The sound of this coffee machine. The low conversation from the booth by the window. The clink of ceramic on ceramic. Why did you file the complaint? Langton said, knowing what it would cost you. Cassidy looked at her coffee. Because I saw it, she said. Once you see something, you're responsible for it. You can look away, but looking away is a choice, and I couldn't make that choice and still be who I wanted to be. She paused. I wanted to be someone I recognized, she said. When I looked in the mirror. That's all. It's not complicated. It's just that. Langton was quiet for a long time. That's more complicated than most people manage, he said. She drove home as the sun was going down. The sky was doing something beautiful. Orange at the horizon, fading into a deep blue above. The kind of sky that made you slow down without deciding to. She drove slowly. She thought about Monday, about the room and the table and the people who would be sitting around it. She thought about what Langton was going to do, what it would cost him, what it would mean for the cases that had been buried. She thought about the people in those cases, people she had never met. People who had walked through doors that were supposed to protect them and had come out the other side carrying something they should never have had to carry. This was for them too. This had always been for them too. She pulled into her parking space and sat for a minute. 41 hours. She could do 41 hours. She had done harder things. On Sunday morning, her phone buzzed with a message from a number she did not recognize. It said, "This is Deputy Nolan Price. I was not at the store on Friday, but I know what happened, and it's not the first time. I want to talk before Monday if you're willing." She stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed back, when and where. They met at a park near the edge of town. Nolan Price was 34 years old. He had a young face and has a posture of someone who had recently realized that the institution he had joined was not the institution he had believed in, and was still figuring out what to do with that. He sat across from her at a picnic table. I've been in the department 4 years, he said, and I've seen things that didn't sit right. Cases that got closed before they should have, reports that got amended, evidence that wasn't there the second time I looked for it. He looked at his hands. I kept telling myself there was an explanation, he said, that I was new and I didn't understand the full picture, that the people who had been there longer knew things I didn't. Cassidy listened. And then Friday happened, he said. I heard about it. From 2 different people in the department. The way it was described to me. The way Decker was talking about it afterward. Like he had done something smart. He paused. I went home Friday night and I sat with it and I made a decision. He looked up at her. I have records, he said. Things I kept copies of because something in me said to. Dates and case numbers and notes I made when things didn't add up. Cassidy was very still. 4 years of records, she said. Yes. She thought about the weight of that. A young man, 4 years in a department, quietly keeping copies of things that didn't add up because some instinct in him said to, not knowing what he was keeping them for, not knowing if they would ever matter, but keeping them anyway. You know what this means for your career, she said. I know, he said. You've thought about this carefully. I've thought about almost nothing else since Friday night, he said. I keep coming back to the same thing. He paused. There are people who got hurt by what happened in that department. Real people, and I have information that might help them. And if I sit on that information because I'm scared, then I'm part of the problem, and I can't be part of the problem. He looked at her. Is that naive? He said. She thought about herself 14 months ago, standing in a hallway at Clarksville PD with a decision to make. No, she said, it's not naive. It's actually very clear thinking. The clearest kind. He exhaled slowly, like he had been holding something for 2 days and just set it down. She leaned forward. Here's what I need from you, she said. I need you to write down everything you remember. Tonight, every case. Every date, every detail. Not a statement yet, just your memory in order. Can you do that? Yes, he said. And I need you to bring the copies you kept. Everything. We're going to go through it together. and we're going to figure out how it connects to what I already have. He nodded. You're not alone in this, she said. I want you to know that. You're not the first person to decide that telling the truth matters more than being comfortable. And it's going to be hard. But you won't be doing it alone. He looked at her with an expression she recognized. It was the expression of someone who had been carrying something heavy in the dark for a long time and had just found out that there was a light. She went home and sat at her kitchen table. She opened her files. She looked at 14 months of careful work, the timeline, the documentation, the names, names and dates and case numbers. And now, Warren's footage, Clifford's statement, Langton's decision, Nolan Price's 4 years of records. She thought about the hearing tomorrow morning. She thought about the people who had built this case with her, most of them without knowing they were building it. A store owner who had installed a camera after a break-in, a retired deputy who had refused to go home, a young reporter who had kept her notebook open, a young deputy who had kept things that didn't right. None of them had planned this. All of them had simply paid attention, had simply stayed when it would have been easier to leave, had simply kept the records, kept the receipts, kept the notebooks and the cameras and the uncomfortable feelings they could not quite explain. That was how the truth survived, not through dramatic gestures, not through the loudest voice in the room, through the ordinary, daily, unglamorous choice to pay attention, to keep the record, to stay. She looked at the tulips on the windowsill, fully open now, bright yellow, the way tulips looked when they had been in water long enough to stop being afraid. 23 hours. She closed her files. She made dinner. She called her mother, who did not know any of this was happening, and who talked for 40 minutes about her garden and her neighbor's new fence and a book she had been reading. Cassidy listened. She asked questions. She laughed at the right moments. She said she was doing fine. After she hung up, she sat for a while in the quiet. She was not fine, exactly. She was tired and uncertain and aware of how much was still unknown about what Monday would bring. But she was here. She was still here. And in the morning, she would be in that room. And the truth she had been carrying for 14 months would finally have somewhere to land. She went to bed at 10. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling. Outside, Hargrove was quiet in the way small towns were quiet at night. The occasional car, a dog somewhere, the wind in the trees that lined Birchwood Lane. She thought about Greta Solberg folding her navy apron at the end of a 50-year day. She thought about Clifford Oakes sitting on a bench in the October evening, waiting, because it was the right thing to do. She thought about Nolan Price sitting across from her at a picnic table, exhaling like a man setting down a weight. She thought about Boyd Langton in a vinyl booth, his hands around a coffee mug saying, "I'd rather they mean something." She thought about all the ordinary people who had simply decided to pay attention, and she thought about the ones who hadn't, the ones who had looked away, the ones who had told themselves the easier story. She did not blame them. She understood them, but she was glad she was not them. At 11:47 p.m., her phone lit up with a text from Warren Solberg. All footage secured, 3 copies. One with my attorney, one with the filing for Monday, one with you. You're ready. She looked at the message. Then she typed back, "Thank you. Tell your mother thank you too." A minute passed. Then she says you're welcome, and she says bring the tulips back to store when they're done. She saves the vases. Cassidy smiled. She put the phone down. She closed her eyes. 20 hours. She let herself sleep. Monday came in gray and quiet, the kind of morning that does not announce itself. No dramatic sunrise. No particular quality of light that says today matters. Just the slow neutral arrival of a day that would be whatever it was going to be, regardless of how anyone felt about it. Cassidy was awake at 5. She had slept better than she expected, not deeply, not long, but the kind of sleep that is enough, the kind that leaves you clear instead of foggy. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window. The tulips on the windowsill had reached that stage where they were fully open, wide and honest and yellow in the gray morning light. They would start to drop their petals in a day or two. That was the nature of tulips. They gave you everything for a short time, and then they let go. She had always thought there was something worth learning in that. She drank her coffee slowly. She showered. She dressed carefully. Not the uniform. That was not appropriate for today, but a dark blazer over a white shirt, slacks. The kind of clothes that said, "I take seriously," without saying anything else. She sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes with her files. She did not review them. She knew them. She had known them for 14 months. Reviewing them now would be like a surgeon reading about an operation they had performed 100 times. The knowledge was in her hands already. In her bones. She just sat with them, said goodbye to the version of this that had lived only in her possession. After today, it would belong to other people too, to a process, to an outcome she could not fully control. That was the hard part, not the work, not the preparation, the letting go. She closed the files. She put them in her bag. She looked around the kitchen one more time. Then she picked up her keys and walked out the door. The drive to Clarksville took 47 minutes. She drove with the radio off. She passed through Hargrove on the way out of town, past the hardware store that had been on Main Street since 1953, past the library that closed early on Wednesdays, past the corner of Elm and 4th where Solberg's Corner Market sat dark quiet at this hour, the green and white awning just visible in the early light. She did not stop, but she slowed. She looked at the store for a moment as she passed. Then she drove on. The hearing was in a conference room on the 3rd floor of the Clarksville PD Administrative Building. She had been in this building many times. She knew where the water fountains were. She knew which elevator was slower. She knew the particular smell of the hallway on the 3rd floor, industrial cleaner and old carpet, a smell she had stopped noticing years ago and now noticed again because she was seeing it from the outside. She arrived at 8:38 a.m., 22 minutes early. She signed in at the desk. She was given a visitor badge. A visitor badge. She had worn a department badge in this building for 4 years, and today she wore a paper visitor badge with her name printed on it in small black letters. She clipped it to her blazer and went to find a chair. The conference room had a long table, eight chairs around it. At 8:55, the people who would be in that room began to arrive. 3 members of the Internal Affairs panel. She knew one of them by reputation. Captain Gregory Slade, who had the particular expression of someone who had heard every version of every story and was waiting to hear this one. A representative from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. A woman in her 50s named Deputy Director Harriet Bloom. She had silver hair cut short and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the kind of economy of movement that comes from spending a long career in rooms where every gesture counts. The department's legal counsel. A man in his 40s who looked like he had not slept well, and Marcus Webb, the union representative who sat at the far end of the table and said good morning to Cassidy when she came in with the neutral warmth of someone committed to not showing which way he was leaning. She sat down. She put her bag on the floor beside her chair. She put her hands on the table, and she waited. The hearing opened at 9:03 a.m. Captain Slade read a procedural statement, the nature of the complaint, the scope of the review, the parties involved, the expected order of proceedings. Cassidy listened. She had read this document before. She had read it many times. When Slade finished, he looked at her. "Captain Marlowe," he said, "we've reviewed your initial filing. Before we proceed to testimony, I want to confirm that you are aware of the scope of what we're examining today." "I am," she said. "The complaint covers a period of 14 months and involves allegation against 4 officers at the rank of lieutenant and below, as well as 1 allegation of supervisory failure at the rank of captain." He paused. "Since your initial filing, the scope of this inquiry has expanded. You are aware of that?" "I am," she said. Harriet Bloom leaned forward. "Captain Marlowe, before we begin, I want to say something for the record." She looked at Cassidy steadily over the rim of her reading glasses. "What you did 14 months ago took courage. Filing a complaint of this nature within a department where you serve, knowing the professional cost. That is not a small thing. This panel is aware of that." Cassidy looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "The courage it took to file does not determine the outcome of this hearing," Bloom said. "The evidence does. But I wanted it on the record that we see it." Something settled in Cassidy's chest. Not relief, something quieter than that. The feeling of being seen accurately, of having someone name the thing correctly. She nodded. "Then let's begin," Slade said. The first hour was documentation. Cassidy walked them through the timeline, 14 months of it. The first incident she had witnessed and documented. The second, the pattern she had identified. The way the cases had been structured to make the pattern hard to see unless you were looking for it from the inside. She was precise. She was organized. She was calm. She had rehearsed none of this. She did not need to. It was simply what had happened, told in order, supported by the records she had kept with the kind of methodical order that had made some of her colleagues call her overcautious. She had never minded being called overcautious. Overcautious was what had kept her in this room. At the 45-minute mark, she presented the additional materials. Warren Solberg's footage came first. They watched it on a laptop screen in the center of the table. All of it. timestamp showing Decker's calls before she had reached the register. The back room. The conversation. All of it. The room was very quiet while it played. When it ended, the legal counsel looked at his notes and did not say anything for a moment. Harriet Bloom took off her reading glasses. She looked at Cassidy. "When did you become aware of this footage?" she said. Friday evening," Cassidy said, "after I left the store." "And this was recorded without your knowledge at the time?" "Yes. The Solberg family has operated a secondary camera system in that location for 3 years. Officer Decker disabled the air surfer before taking me to the back room. He was not aware of the secondary system." Bloom looked at the frozen image on the laptop screen. Decker's face mid-sentence. "I see," she said. Then came Clifford Oakes's written statement, 8 pages. Careful, precise language, 26 years of professional experience evident in every sentence. What he had observed, when he had observed it, what it indicated to someone with his background. Then Deputy Nolan Price's documentation, 4 years of records, case numbers, dates, notes made in real time by a young deputy who had kept copies of things that did not add up because something in him said to. Slade read through the first 10 pages and looked up. "Deputy Price was not at the store on Friday," he said. "No," Cassis said, "but he contacted me on Sunday. He has been keeping the records for its entire time with the Hargrove department. He came forward independently." Slade looked at the stack of pages in front of him. 4 years of a young deputy's careful, quiet record-keeping. He set the pages down. He looked at his colleagues. Something moved in the room, not drama, not the sudden revelation of a courtroom scene. Just the quiet, weighty recognition of people who had spent their careers in this kind of work, looking at something that was undeniably, clearly true. "We're going to need a short recess," Slade said. She sat in a chair in the hallway and drank water from a paper cup. The hallway was quiet at this hour. The administrative offices were down the other end. The occasional person walked past, glanced at her, continued. She looked at the wall across from her. There was a framed photograph there. A department photo from some year in the past. Rows of officers in uniform, standing straight. Faces she did not recognize. A time before her. She wondered what those people had believed in. She wondered how many of them had had mornings like this one. Standing at a decision point. Choosing. Most people wanted to do the right thing. She believed that. She had always believed that. Even when the evidence seemed to suggest otherwise. Most people wanted to be good. They wanted to be honest and fair and to sleep without difficulty at night. The trouble was not malice most of the time. The trouble was the slow accumulation of small compromises. The 100 times you told yourself it was not the right moment. 1,000 times you chose the easier story, until the easier story was all you had left. That was how people ended up in Decker's position. Not by deciding one morning to become someone who abused authority, but by deciding over and over that protecting themselves was more important than protecting the right thing, until the two were so tangled together, they could not tell them apart anymore. She did not hate Decker. She did not hate any of them. She wanted the truth to land in the right place. She wanted the people who had been harmed to have a record of it. She wanted the cases to be reopened. She wanted Nolan Price to be able to go to work on Tuesday without carrying a secret. That was what this was for. Not revenge. Never revenge. The door to the conference room opened. The legal counsel looked out. "We're ready to continue," he said. She stood up. She went back in. The second part of the hearing was testimony. Harriet Bloom led most of it. She was methodical. She asked clear questions and let the answers breathe. She did not fill silences she did not need to fill. She asked about the events at Solberg's Corner Market. Cassidy described them in order. What she had observed when Decker made his calls. What he had said in the back room. The specific moment she had understood the stop was not about shoplifting. "You identified the motivation in real time," Bloom said, "while you were in that room." "Yes, and you made a choice not to reveal your rank or badge at that point." "Why?" Cassidy considered. "Because I wanted to see how far it would go," she said. "Without my badge as a variable, I wanted to know what this situation looked like for someone who didn't have what I have. What it felt like. What the options were." She paused. "There have been people in that department's jurisdiction who had no badge, no bar number, no Clifford Oakes recognizing them from across a room, and I wanted to sit in their experience for as long as I could, because they don't get to walk out of it the way I walked out of it." The room was quiet. "I think about those people," she said. "I have thought about them for 14 months. They are the reason the files are as thorough as they are. They are the reason I did not stop." Bloom looked at her for a long moment. "For the record," Bloom said, "who are those people?" Diane Ostrowski, Cassidy said. Case number 2022-481. Closed without investigation. She said it from memory. Kevin Barnetta. Case number 2023-119. Amended without basis. Closed. She said it without looking at her files. Raymond and Carol Prudhomme. Case number 2023-344. Referred for further review and never reviewed. She said all of them. Every name. Every number. She had memorized them. Not because she needed them. Because she felt she owed them that. The simple dignity of being remembered accurately. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Captain Slade wrote something on his notepad. Harriet Bloom had taken off her reading glasses entirely. She was looking at Cassidy with an expression that was not pity and not admiration, but something in between. The look of one professional recognizing another across a difficult distance. "Thank you, Captain Marlowe," Bloom said. At 11:15 a.m., there was a knock on the conference room door. The legal counsel went to answer. He spoke briefly with someone in the hallway. He came back and spoke quietly till Slade looked up. "There is an individual in the hallway who has requested to address this panel," Slade said. "He arrived voluntarily, without counsel and without prior arrangement." He paused. "His name is Sheriff Boyd Langton of Hargrove County." The room shifted. Cassidy kept her expression still. She had not known if he would come. She had hoped. But she had not known. Slade looked at Cassidy, then at Bloom. They exchanged a brief look that contained a long conversation. "Bring him in," Bloom said. Boyd Langton walked into the conference room in his civilian clothes, the canvas jacket from Saturday. The same lines in his face, but something different in the way he held himself. Not the posture of a man managing a situation. The posture of a man who had put something down and was still adjusting to the absence of the weight. He looked at Cassidy once when he came in. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. He sat in the chair at the end of the table that had been pulled out for him. He had a folder in his hands. He set it on the table. "I want to give a statement," he said. "Voluntary. On the record. No counsel present by my own choice." Slade nodded. "Proceed." Langton opened the folder. He looked at the first page. Then he looked up and pushed the folder slightly to the side, and he spoke without looking at it. "I have been sheriff of Hargrove County for 22 years, he said. "In that time, I have made decisions that I told myself were judgment calls. Managing a department. Keeping the peace. Protecting people who had given a long time to the job." He paused. "Some of those decisions were right. A lot of them were right, but some of them were wrong, and I knew they were wrong when I made them, and I made them anyway." He looked at the panel. "I am here to give a full account of those decisions. Every case I closed that should not have been closed. Every report I amended or allowed to be amended. Every time I stood in a hallway or a back room and let something happen that I should have stopped." He paused. "I was at Solberg's Corner Market on Friday evening. I arrived after Officer Decker. I was aware of the nature of the stop before I arrived. I was told by Officer Decker that the purpose of the stop was to prevent Captain Marlowe from attending today's hearing." He said it clearly, without hedging. "I did not stop it when I arrived. I should have. I did not." He looked at Cassidy. "I'm sorry," he said, not to the panel. To her. She held his gaze. She thought about what he had said in the booth at Patton's Diner. "I'd rather they mean something." "The folder I have here," Langton continued, looking back at the panel, "contains my records of every case I believe warrants review. Dates, case numbers, my personal notes at the time. I have also included the names of officers whose conduct I covered for and who I believe should be subject to their own review." He slid the folder to the center of the table. Harriet Bloom reached for it. She opened it. She looked at the first page, then the second. She turned pages slowly. Her expression did not change, but something in her posture did. The kind of shift that happens when you are reading something and it is more than you expected. She looked up at Langton. "This goes back 11 years, she said. "Yes," he said. "Some of these cases involve officers who are no longer with the department, yes, and some involve officers who are currently serving. Yes." She closed the folder carefully. She set her reading glasses on top of it. "Sheriff Langton," she said, "I want to be direct with you about what this means for your position." "I know what it means," he said. "I've known since Saturday." Bloom looked at him for a long moment. "All right," she said. The hearing broke for lunch at 12:30. Cassidy sat alone at a table in a diner 2 blocks from the building. She ordered soup and bread and ate most of it. She looked out the window at the Clarksville street outside. People walking. A woman with a stroller. 2 men in hard hats eating lunch off a low wall. A dog pulling its leash to investigate something near a trash can. Ordinary life. Going on around all of this. She thought about Nolan Price. who was at work today, not knowing yet what was happening in this room, who had gone home Sunday night after their meeting and had written everything down and had sent it to her at 11:30 p.m., 23 pages in a clean, clear hand. She thought about Warren Solberg, who had spent a Friday night saving footage to 3 different locations because his mother had called and said there was a situation. She thought about Renata Voss and her 7 pages of notes and her 30 years of paying attention to things other people missed. She thought about Bet Halloran, 69 years old, sitting in a folding chair on the sidewalk outside Solberg's because leaving felt like the wrong thing to do. She thought about Clifford Oakes. She took out her phone and sent him a text. 2 words. He came. The response came back in less than a minute. I know. He called me this morning before he drove up. I told him it was the right thing. He said he knew. She looked at that for a moment. Then she put the phone away and finished her soup. The afternoon session was shorter than the morning. The panel had what it needed. The questions were more specific now. Clarifications, confirmations, the kind of questions that come at the end of a process, not the beginning. At 3:17 p.m., Slade called a recess to confer with Bloom and the 3rd panel member. They were gone for 22 minutes. Cassidy sat at the table and waited. She was very good at waiting. She had learned it the hard way over 14 months, waiting for responses that came slowly or not at all. Waiting for the process to move at the pace of a process, not at the pace of urgency. Waiting in a way that was not passive but active. The waiting of someone who is using the time to stay clear. The panel came back at 3:39 p.m. Slades sat down. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at Cassidy. Captain Marlowe, he said, this panel has reviewed the materials presented today in conjunction with the original filing and supporting documentation from the past 14 months. He paused. The complaint is sustained. She was still. The specific allegations regarding the conduct of the 4 named officers are substantiated by the evidence presented. Those officers will be subject to formal disciplinary proceedings. Additionally, based on the materials provided this afternoon, we are referring 7 additional cases for review, including the cases you named in your testimony this morning. He paused. The events of Friday evening at Solberg's Corner Market are being referred to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation for separate review. Officer Decker has been placed on administrative leave pending that review. He looked at her steadily. Your record reflects no wrongdoing. Your conduct throughout this process has been consistent with the standards and values of this department. Another pause. Your administrative leave is ended effective today. Your badge and full duties are reinstated. He slid a document across the table. She looked at it. Her name at the top, the department seal, the date. She picked it up. She read it carefully, every word the way she read everything. Then she folded it once and put it in her bag. Thank you, she said. Bloom leaned forward. Captain Marlowe, one more thing. Cassidy looked at her. The people you named this morning? Bloom said. Ostrowski, Barnett, Prudhomme, the others, they will be contacted. Their cases will be reopened. That process will take time, but it will happen. Cassidy nodded slowly. That was the part that mattered most. Not the badge, not the reinstatement. The names being spoken in a room where it counted. Thank you, she said again. And this time she meant it differently, more completely. She walked out of the building at 3:51 p.m. The afternoon had changed while she was inside. The gray morning sky had shifted into something pale and clear. Not warm exactly, but bright. The particular brightness of a late October afternoon that has decided at the last moment to be generous. She stood on the front steps of the building. She breathed in, out. She had been in that building in one form or another for 4 years. She had walked through that door as a patrol officer, then as a detective, then as a captain. She had walked through it at 6 in the morning and midnight and every hour in between. Today was the first time she had walked out of it, feeling like herself, fully herself. Not the version that had been carrying something too heavy to name. Not the version that had learned to keep part of herself very quiet to protect it. Just herself. She walked to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment. She took her badge out of her bag. Not the visitor badge, her badge, Captain's Shield, the one she had been wearing on her belt that Friday when she walked into Solberg's Corner Market to buy tulips and spasas and sharp cheddar and a piece of ordinary life. She looked at it. It was just a piece of metal. She knew that. But it was also the thing she had chosen to protect, not by hiding it, but by making sure it still meant something. By refusing to let it become a prop for a story she did not believe in. She clipped it to her belt. She started the car. She did not drive back to Hargrove right away. She drove to a part of Clarksville she knew well. A neighborhood she had worked in her first year on the patrol. Small houses, big trees, a block with a community garden that had been there since before she was born. She parked and walked for a while. She did not know exactly why. She just felt the need to be in a place she knew. To let the day land in her body before she got back in the car, she walked past the community garden. Someone had planted late-season kale that was doing better than it had any right to in October. There were still some marigolds going, orange and yellow at the edges of the beds. An older woman was on her knees at the far end, doing something with a trowel. She looked up when Cassidy passed. "Afternoon," the woman said. "Afternoon," Cassidy said. "You look like someone who just finished something hard," the woman said. Not unkindly, just observationally, the way people who have lived a long time sometimes said things directly. Cassidy stopped. She looked at the woman, late 60s maybe, dirt on her knees, patient eyes. "I did," Cassidy said. The woman nodded. "Good day or bad day?" Cassidy thought about that question. She thought about Decker in a back room, about Langton in a vinyl booth, about Nolan Price exhaling at a picnic table, about Harriet Bloom saying "we see it," about the names she had said out loud in a room where they could finally be heard. "Good day," she said. "Hard but good." The woman nodded again. She looked satisfied by this answer, the way people were satisfied when they got an honest one. "Those are the best kind," she said. "The ones that are both." She turned back to her kale. Cassidy stood there for another moment. Then she said thank you, even though the woman had not done anything in particular, and the woman said, "Get on home," in the cheerful, non-negotiable way of someone who meant it kindly. Cassidy smiled and walked back to her car. She got back to Hargrove at 5:30 p.m., the same time, roughly, that she had walked into Solberg's Corner Market 3 days ago. She drove down Elm Street. She turned at 4th. She pulled into the small parking lot beside the store. The open sign was lit in the window. The green and white awning was catching the last of the afternoon light. She got out of the car. She pushed open the front door. The bell above the door chimed. The store smelled the same as it always smelled. Coffee and cardboard and something baked earlier in the day that still lingered. Greta Solberg looked up from behind the counter. She looked at Cassidy. She took in the badge on her belt, the blazer, the expression on Cassidy's face, which was not triumphant but was something steady and real and hard-earned. Greta did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Well, just that. Well," in the voice of a woman who had seen enough of life to know that some things did not need a lot of words around them. Cassidy walked to the counter. She put both hands flat on the same surface where Greta had put her hands 3 days ago, and she looked at the older woman. "It's done," she said. "The hearing, the complaint is sustained. The cases will be reopened." Greta nodded slowly. "And Decker?" she said. "Administrative leave, TBI review." Another nod. "Langton?" "He came to the hearing. He gave a voluntary statement. He submitted 11 years of records." Greta was quiet for a moment. She looked out the front window at the street outside. "That must have cost him something," she said. "Yes," Cassidy said. "It did good," Greta added. And then, after a pause, "I mean that with respect, not satisfaction. There's a difference." "I know," Cassidy said. "I know the difference." They looked at each other. Two women, separated by 50 years, connected by 3 days, and a corner market, and the shared belief that some things were worth standing up for even when standing was hard. "I have something for you," Cassidy said. She reached into her bag. She brought out the navy blue apron. She had stopped on her way out of Clarksville to have it dry cleaned. It had taken 4 minutes. She had waited. The woman at the counter had not asked any questions. She had just taken the apron and brought it back, pressed and clean and folded. Cassidy set it on the counter between them. Greta looked at it. She reached out and touched the edge of it with 2 fingers. Just touched it, the way you touched something you were glad was still there. Then she picked it up. She unfolded it. She put it on, tying it behind her with the practiced motion of someone who had done this 10,000 times. She smoothed it flat with both hands. She looked up at Cassidy. "Thank you," she said. Cassidy nodded. She turned to go. Then she stopped. She turned back. "One more thing," she said. She reached into her bag and brought out a small glass vase, one of the ones from her kitchen windowsill. The tulips had finished the day before. She had washed the vase and brought it with her. She set it on the counter. "Warren said you'd save the vases," she said. Greta looked at the vase. Then she looked at Cassidy. A small, real smile moved across her face. "We do," she said. "We always have." Outside, Clifford Oakes was sitting on his bench. Of course he was. Cassidy stopped on the front step. He looked up. He read her face the way a man who spent 26 years reading situation reads a face. He nodded once. She nodded back. She walked over and sat down beside him. They sat for a moment in the early evening quiet. The street lamps had not come on yet. The light was at that particular moment where it was not quite day and not quite night. "How was the drive up?" he said. "Fine," she said. "Clear roads. Weather held." It did. A car passed on 4th Street. A dog walker went by on the opposite sidewalk. Somewhere down the block a door opened and closed. "Boyd called me," Clifford said. "About an hour ago." "How did he sound?" she said. Clifford considered this. "Like a man who did something hard and needed to tell someone," he said. "I've heard that before. It sounds different depending on the person. Some people sound relieved. Some sound like they're still not sure." He paused. He sounded like he wasn't sure yet, but like he believed the not sure was worth it. Cassidy looked at the street. "That's enough," she said. "For now." "Yeah," Clifford said. "It is." A moment passed. "No lice came by the store this afternoon," Clifford said. "While you were in Clarksville, he wanted to know if there was anything he could do." Cassidy looked at him. "Greta put him to work stocking shelves," Clifford said. She laughed. It was a real laugh. The kind that surprised her by coming out. The kind that happened when something was genuinely funny and also something more than funny. Relief and warmth and the particular joy of a story landing in the right place. "Of course she did," she said. "He stocked shelves for 2 hours," Clifford said. "Greta says he's good at it. Organized." She said if the department doesn't work out, he has a future in retail. Cassidy shook her head, still smiling. The street lamps clicked on. The light changed. The corner of Elm and 4th went from late afternoon to early evening in the quiet, steady way it did every day. The same way it had done since the lamps were installed. Since long before Greta Solberg opened her store. Since long before any of them were here to see it. "Can I ask you something?" Cassidy said. Clifford looked at her. "You said you had been in that position once," she said. "The one where you knew better and did the easier thing anyway, and you see someone sat you down and said something honest to you." "I did say that. What did they say?" Clifford was quiet for a moment. He looked at the lamppost across the street. "They said the job is supposed to serve the people, not the other way around." He paused. "And they said you already know that. I can see it in you. The question is whether you're going to act like you know it." The words sat in the air between them. Cassidy nodded slowly. "Who said it?" Clifford looked at her. "My partner at the time," he said. 20 years old, first year on the job. She saw something I was looking away from and she said it out loud." He paused. "I don't know if she knows what it did for me. I never quite told her." Cassidy looked at him. "Tell her," she said. He looked at her sideways. "When you get the chance," she said. "Tell her." He looked forward again. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I should." She drove home as the night came in properly. Dark sky, a few stars. The street quiet in the way that small towns were quiet on a Monday evening. She parked. She walked up to her apartment. She unlocked the door and turned on the light. The kitchen was the same as she had left it. The table with her files, which she could now archive. The coffee maker, the windowsill where the tulips had been. The vase was gone, with Greta. But the windowsill was still there. And tomorrow or the next day, she would put something else on it. She did not know what yet. Something small, something that meant ordinary life was back. She made tea. She sat at the table. She thought about what came next. Going back to work. Being in the building again. In her full capacity with her badge and her full duties and the particular responsibility of being someone who had seen what she had seen and was still in the room. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But tonight she let herself sit with the quiet. She thought about the people whose names she had said out loud today. The ones who deserved to have their cases reopened. The ones who had walked through the wrong doors and carried something they should never have had to carry. They would get phone calls in the coming weeks. She would not be there for those calls. She would not know what was said. But she knew that somewhere in an office in Asheville, someone with authority and a responsibility to the truth would pick up a phone and say, "We found something in your case that needs to be looked at again." And the person on the other end of that call would feel something they had maybe stopped believing they would feel. That mattered. That was the whole point. She finished her tea. She washed the mug. She turned off the kitchen light. She stood in the dark for a moment. Then she said out loud to no one in particular, in the quiet of a kitchen in Hargrove at Hennessy on a Monday night in October, "It landed." Just that. It landed. She went to bed. The next morning she drove to Solberg's Corner Market. Before work she bought apples, pasta, marinara, sharp cheddar, a Sox-off crackers, and a small bunch of yellow tulips from the bucket near the register. Brianna was at register 1. "Those are the last bunch again," Brianna said. "They always are," Cassidy said. She paid. She took her bag. She smiled at Greta, who was behind the counter in her navy apron, pressing the creases flat with the palm of her hand. She walked out into the Tuesday morning. The air was cool. The green and white awning above her was catching the early light. The corner of Elm and 4th was doing what it did every morning, being exactly what it was. A corner in a small town, a store that had been there for 50 years and would be there tomorrow. Cassidy stood on the front step. She looked down at the tulips in her bag, yellow in the morning light. She thought about what they had taught her this week, without meaning to. That you gave everything for a short time. That you opened fully when the conditions were right. And then, when it was time, you let go. Not because it did not matter, because it had mattered. Completely, and mattering completely was its own kind of completion. She stepped off the front step. She walked to her car. She put the bag in the back seat, the tulips on top where they would not get crushed. She looked in the rearview mirror at Solberg's Corner Market one last time. Then she drove to work. Somewhere in Clarksville, a woman named Diane Ostrowski got a letter in the mail. She opened it at her kitchen table. She read it twice. She sat for a long time. Then she picked up the phone. And for the first time in 2 years, she told someone what had happened to her. And someone listened.